friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters on Armstrong Television. This is the show that allows you to get up close and personal with authors, editors, and publishers all across the country. I'm your host, Carter Seaton, and it's great to have you with us. And it's also great today to have Randal O'Wain. Randal has been with us before with his wife, Misha Marin, but today we're going to focus just on him. Randal holds an MFA from the well-known Iowa Nonfiction Writing Program. He's the author of Meander Belt, Family, Loss, and Coming of Age in the Working Class South, Hallelujah Station, and other stories. And his essays and short stories have appeared in Oxford American, Guernica, The Pinch, Booth, Hotel America, Story South, among others. He splits his time between teaching in North Carolina and living on a farm in West Virginia. So good to have you with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carter. Thank you for having me.
We're thrilled to talk about Hallelujah Station and other stories. I want to know all about that. Yeah, it's a great book. All right. So first of all, this was released during the height of the first surge of the pandemic. Right. When did it come out and how was that experience?
Let's see, when did it come out? I believe it was
early 2020.
Yeah, October 2020, I think is when it came out. I was just like trying to peek in here, but yeah, but of course it wouldn't say what the month. Yeah, and the interesting thing about that is Meander Belt had come out exactly a year before or 11 months before. And to avoid this awful thing that I think a lot of writers go through where they obsess over their writerly or books identity on the internet, I set up a lot of public readings. I traveled all the way out to the West Coast and up to the Midwest, and flew from Iowa to New York to do a reading, and all in an effort to engage with the book, to engage with this new life in person. That was really important to me, so that I wouldn't just sit there with my phone, because I feel like I'll talk to other writers and they're like refreshing their Amazon page to see if their ranking has changed at all, or there's this way where you can look at your website to see like the activity, that if that's changed at all. And I find that to be just incredibly miserable, like a really miserable way to go about engaging with something that should be really exciting and beautiful. And I knew that coming out on a university press, or like Hallelujah Station coming out on a small press, that there isn't this $50,000 marketing budget that, say, Riverhead or Knopf has to make sure that everyone on the planet sees the cover of the book. Or they're not paying Barnes and Noble to put it at the table, right? Little known fact is all of those books that are on the tables at Barnes and Nobles are bought. They're rented space. It's not curated by a bookseller. So I knew that in order to sell books and to engage with booksellers and to engage with readers, I had to be out there hustling, for lack of a better word. And then I had the same expectations for Hallelujah Station, and had already booked a bunch of events. But then it went online, and I had a lot of fun ultimately doing it online. I decided, instead of doing readings, that I would kind of make a soundtrack for the book. So I picked a few songs and talked about how the music might relate to certain short stories, and played the songs for the audience, and kind of treated it more like radio. I actually asked the people who were watching to ignore me, to turn the video off, to do dishes, to cook food, and treat it as if it were radio, because I found that to be a more interesting way to engage with pandemic readings. So I tried to make it more multimedia and also informal, because there was going to be no replacement for sitting in an audience. So I have no complaints really about, maybe I have complaints about my book sales. I think they might have been higher if I could have gone out in the world, but I had no complaints really about the transition.
I wish I had talked to you beforehand, because I had a book that came out in September of 2020, and if I'd known that was a good way to do it, I would have adopted your plan. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was just, like why treat it like the same thing when it's not?
Yeah.
You
So
know?
tell me about the stories. They're all, it's a collection of short stories. And I'm curious now as to what songs you picked to go with what stories.
Yeah, well, the first story is called Salvation. It's page 15 through 18. It's just bottom of 15, so it's not that long. This is just for clarification, or that's not the right word, but heads up on what the story is about. So Salvation's about this man who lives on a houseboat. It used to be an old casino steamer that he's lived on, and he intentionally moved on there so he could cook methamphetamine, because no one really cared about this area. All the boats are derelict. They're basically just sort of rented to anybody who couldn't get a lease because of like evictions or felony charges. So it's a very sort of down and out cast of characters, and he knew that he'd be able to kind of get away with his cook unbothered. And then he is bothered because this kid Lee shows up and sort of gains the affections of everybody on the boat, especially the narrator and the owner of the marina, Hazel. So what happens before is Lee is sent to the marina, sort of pimped out by this older man, to an older man who lives on a boat. And then they take him, and then the people from the marina take him away from the old man and end up like taking care of him. And then he goes away, but this is what I'm about to read is when he comes back. Less than a week later, I walked up to the bar in a celebratory mood because I had finally driven my last load of every rotten, ruined, worthless thing from Salvation to the dump. I'd withdrawn $100 of Mom's money and planned to get as many people drunk as I could before the sum dwindled. I carried a box of CDs and planned to DJ, balancing on that precious edge between nodding out and tequila. Hazel hated when I did this. Said he didn't want his bar turned into anybody's goddamn frat house, but he loved when I played Otis Redding and Shangri-La's and the 13th floor elevators. On my way up, I hollered like a town crier, "Shots on me, you bums. Come keep me company." Peter Harrison hopped off his deck playing the harmonica, marching in time, and from there formed a slow parade of folks ready to drink away whatever they couldn't sweat or sleep out during the day. When I stepped into the bar, there was Lee. He held a backpack full of cheap shit. Mechanical pencils, rubber duckies for the tub, votive candles, hard candy. He also had blank CDs and one car stereo. Hazel had crossed his arms and gripped his biceps like he meant to tear the meat away. He caught my eye and nodded towards the boy. The bar was dark and Lee was moving so fast, talking fast too, grabbing items at random from his bag and thrusting them into the faces of each resident as they strolled into the bar. He shouted prices, 10 cents for this pencil, or a buck for this duck, buck for a duck, buck a duck, big money, y'all, bring the money, $25 for this stereo. Peter put down his harmonica, his smiling face rearranged. Hattie took Lee in her arms and wept, and he fought her, but she was too strong for him, too fierce. He stopped flailing and let her lift him off the ground. She held him like a baby and not a boy so that his head rested on the crook of her neck, and she petted his hair, and when she turned toward the bar, I saw his face in the dim light. Whoever had beaten Lee before sending him out with that backpack had not meant the boy to survive. Besides his eyes, purpled and crushed into slits, his temples were swollen beyond his ears, and one nostril had been cut down the middle so that the single slash now made two infected wounds. I succumbed like Hattie and Hazel to a nuclear rage when I looked at Lee's face, imagining the hands that had worked him, and I tore Lee from Hattie's embrace and sat him on the stool. I could see terror in his eyes, but I could not control my emotions or the level of my voice, and I demanded answers. I shook him. He watched me from a distance, his soul gone into hiding, leaving only the husk of a boy. "Let go, fool," Hazel said. "Bring him over here, Hattie. Hug him like you done. Tell him this will hurt worse than a beating, but will heal." Hazel held a bottle of Everclear in one hand and a sewing needle in the other. I saw then what he meant to do, and I yelled, "Wait." I ran back to Salvation and dropped 3 codeine tablets in my hand, broke one in half for Lee. By the time I returned, Lee's face was soaking wet and he smelled strongly of 100 proof, and he was hollering, but his entire body was rigid in Hattie's grasp. No one, not a single person, made a sound. Hattie and Hazel moved as one. Hazel doused one cut with Everclear, and Hattie pressed the gauze tightly until Hazel cleaned a different wound, and then Hattie's sure hand followed. Give him these. I handed Hazel both halves of codeine. He won't feel a thing. Hattie dropped the pills into Lee's mouth, held his jaw closed, and waited until she saw the boy's throat ingest the painkillers. Hazel did not wait. He threaded the needle, ran the point over a flame until it glowed orange, and sewed Lee's nostril together. Hazel's thick and calloused fingers were confident and kind. Lee passed out before Hazel had finished. Hattie taped gauze over the boy's nose and bandaged the cuts above his eyes. Lay him yonder, Hazel told me. I tucked Lee in Hazel's bed under a wool blanket. I imagined how he must have felt, the codeine slipping through him like warm water, and I wanted him to move, to have more comfort than the pill could offer, something a boy might love. Hazel's room had only the necessities of life: soap, dental stuff, and a towel. I took the towel and folded it lengthwise and then down and over until I held a fat, soft loaf. I raised Lee's hands, cut and scabbed, overlooked in the rush to clean his infected nose, and arrested the terry cloth against his body. Silence had melded with the humidity in the bar and formed a membrane of sorts. I slapped $100 on the counter and told Hazel to keep the tequila and Pabst flowing until money ran out. I'm off duty, he said. Hazel set a full bottle of tequila on the counter and unloaded all the cold brews into ice buckets, restocked the coolers, and clicked the padlock closed. This should serve. He brought a stout bottle of rum for his own use, and neither he nor Hattie looked at anyone as they took a booth nearest the back room where Lee slept. I put on the Shaw Singers, Since He Touched Me, and poured a full glass tequila, grabbed a cold Pabst, and settled into playing music. So I chose Otis Redding's Coffee and Cigarettes, and that song, Since He Touched Me, by the Shaw Singers, which is a Memphis gospel group. It's a fantastic song. They're a fantastic gospel group. So those are two of the songs that I played to kind of get you, or get the reader in the mood for that moment.
That's a great way of doing it. I think that was wonderful. And the story is really touching. I was struck by that particular story, Salvation. Had any of these stories appeared in literary journals before you collected them?
Yeah. I have to kind of go back and remember, but the title story came out in Zone 3. The Rembrandt Behind Windows came out in Q. Loose came out in Master's Review. Shadow Play came out in Booth. And I believe that's it. I think it was a Calf and Half.
Okay, so how do you choose among all the short stories you may have written? How do you choose which ones are going into a collection, or do you write them specifically for a collection?
Yeah, I had about, 30 to choose from or something like that. And there are only 9 in here, I think, maybe 10. I should have looked at this beforehand, maybe. Let's see, how many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah. And what I ended up going for, because the stories are, I think, different structurally. They're not all realism necessarily. Hallelujah Station is about a woman who had been catatonic for most of her life, and then when she started slowly coming back to consciousness, she found that she was picking up a radio signal from a silver molar in the back of her mouth, and that she could communicate by turning off and on the radio signal. So it's pretty out there. So they're not, so it wasn't like trying to be a bizarro all the way through. But what I wanted was to really like find the stories where people were at this, like where we meet them when they were living their lives and their lives had come to a point where they had to change. The way that they were living, the way that they were existing was not going to serve them anymore. And either through the appearance of, say, like a boy like Lee, or a radio signal in your tooth, they're forced to renegotiate how they live their lives, for better or worse. Not everybody
Make a good decision.
not everybody makes a good decision. Rarely do they, actually. Yeah.
That's sort of the same way that a novel has to be constructed. Somewhere along the line, the protagonist something happens and they supposedly something changes them for better or worse.
Yeah, it's like a crisis point.
Yeah.
Finding that crisis point. And another thing that I was looking for is few of these stories are very voice driven. They're usually very narrative in scene, so it's less about like how a mind is thinking on the page or analyzing or sort of meditating on a situation, and more sort of kind of like a cinematic remove. So that was the stylistic choice that in terms of culling the stories was, all of these are pretty much in deep scene as opposed to like above the shoulders.
But yet they are character driven, more so than setting driven.
Yeah, exactly. They're absolutely character driven, but they're not cerebral, I think is what I'm.
Right. It's what happens, not what somebody thinks about it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So we get to like, it's dramatic irony, I guess. We watch them mess up.
Right. You're familiar with the term grit lit, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you think this falls into that? The stories are about, like
I would hope so.
Junk dealers, death, drugs, drinking, sex, all that.
I would hope so. I really would. I think grit lit is wonderful. I mean, being a poor boy from the deep South, I never really knew. I don't know. I didn't know comfort, really. The house I grew up in was a 1906 boarding home that had been restructured so many times until it was finally like turned into a single family home. And most of the rooms in the house didn't even have walls. It was just bare studs, and it was in inner city Memphis. And I had free reign of the town. So like I found beauty in alleyways and under bridges before I found beauty in the forest. And so I can't imagine if I tried to write anything that
bucolic scenes, it would be hard.
It would be really hard, or maybe inauthentic, at least at that point, at least in the point when writing Hallelujah Station in my life. I've been in Southern West Virginia we moved there in 2015, but we've been spending every off time from university there since 2012, so almost 10 years. And my relationship to that particular landscape, and how nature and the wild engages with you has added, I wouldn't say it has like changed me, but added an absolute new layer to how I see the world. But I didn't really know how to see the world beyond the derelict.
Do you expect, well, I have two questions. One, do you expect now that you've spent almost 10 years on the land to sort of change some of the perspective of your stories?
I don't know about
or the settings, the people, the subject matters.
Yeah, I'm not sure about fiction, but I just finished a novel that is set in a unnamed rural space, because I want to make this argument that in the US we're less constrained by regionalism and or accents, and or like, you're from the South, you're from New England, you're from the Midwest, and we're more sort of bifurcated in terms of rural and urban. And so I wanted to, there's this, the town is called Lenore, but the nearest city is just called the city. And it's never specified where in the country it is. And I did that on purpose because I think that it doesn't even really matter as much anymore, because of the interjection, inclusion of social media, the access to international video and sound and news, the flattening of accents through television and news and weather, but it primarily takes place. These two brothers grow up on a freshwater pearl farm, so they harvest pearls from freshwater mussels. So they live at the backup of a reservoir and a dam, the Lenore Dam, that is the state no longer needs it. And so the story starts where the state is preparing to destroy the dam, which means that it would drain the reservoir, which means that their family business would go under. And so much of it takes place with how this landscape of the reservoir and these two ridges that come out of the water that are called the Narrows, and the book is called The Narrows, and these two brothers, kind of imagination and family lore mythology about this Lenore mansion and this estate down below where lady bank robbers, Minnie Downs and Queenie had sealed gold into the basement, and how this family lore and mythology sort of influences their lives as these two brothers separate, one becoming an underground or a legal circuit boxer, and the other becoming a musician. And so in that way, it's all about the rural landscape. And we rarely actually enter the urban. And when we do, it's just the city, or it's very specifically the Upper West Side, or very specifically San Francisco, or something like that. And so I do. But then the next novel that I'm working on kind of takes place more in New England, and around. I'm having to read a lot of memoirs and biography about rich politicians, because it's about the sort of like education of these two people into becoming domestic terrorists. Wow. But it's called The Poser, and it's this way of people trying to, in one way, make a difference and also disregard their extreme privilege at the same time. And so how they keep upping the ante, like really kind of in conversation with each other, in terms of their activism. So that one I think will be more, I guess, above the shoulders, and it will be more sort of social comedy, and absolutely like nothing I know about whatsoever. I don't know what it's like to be the family of like a Colin Powell or a Rumsfeld or a Cheney, or a Bush for that matter. But I'm very curious to see, like, what if I took their kids and made them activists, but my nonfiction has geared almost entirely explicitly to nature, and that is a surprise, I think, to me. Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say is that your stories remind me, in Hallelujah Station, remind me of those of Brees Pancake.
Oh yeah, I love him.
Yeah, is he? His characters are usually down and outers and have some sort of demon. Is he one of your inspirations?
It's so funny. I absolutely love him. I think he's incredible. And the answer is yet no. He isn't. I love how he. I teach. What is it? Winter, Days of Winter. It's the story about the brother, the ambitionless brother, and he's living with his parents, and one of the parents is blind and the other has dementia, and his older brother is a pastor, and he just now, like so late in life, he's like finally thinking that he should do something besides live with his parents, like when they're too far gone. And so he's mad at his older brother for not taking them away, taking them in. There's a vehicle that doesn't run, which I think is a great symbol or metaphor. And he goes squirrel hunting, and he comes back, and that's basically the story, is that, like, it's like you want to blame his brother for not helping him, but at the same time, you got to think like this guy had plenty of opportunity throughout his life to try to do something besides live with his parents. And it's just now that it's too much trouble and the farm is going under that he's thinking that he needs to do something else. So that kind of like story structure and that kind of way of thinking about character, absolutely, I'm inspired by Pancake. When a lot of people talk about being inspired by Pancake, though, I think that they're talking specifically about landscape. And in the same way with his cousin, with Anne Pancake, you know, like her story Jolo, I also teach that story. Pancake, they're also talking about landscape, and in that way, you know, and Misha Mayer, my wife, is very much like a landscape artist, a landscape writer. I think for me, as you said before, I'm more interested in kind of like the character than I am the landscape, and I think that it has to do with West Virginia is just so powerful. The landscape is so powerful and so unique and fecund, and complex, because you know you have such examples in Greenbrier County. You have such examples of insane wealth and insane poverty, both overlaid on one of the most spectacular landscapes I've ever lived in, you know, or even been to. And so that's of course, if you come from that landscape, how could you ever leave it? Yeah, I do absolutely love him. They just repressed his collection again with, I think, like a new intro with Jane M. Phillips, I think. And I find that to be heartening, you know, that he's maintained a presence in public consciousness. It's a damn shame that he couldn't really deal, that living wasn't really for him.
Right. What you said just a minute ago reminded me of the opening of your book, the line, the epigram. It says, if some of you have demons in your head who talk to you in profanity or whatever, don't let your demon keep you off the joy bus.
Yeah. Wesley Willis.
Why did you choose that?
Well,
is that kind of a mantra for yourself?
No, it isn't necessarily, but it was definitely a mantra for these characters.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that every character in this book is dealing with bad mental health in some way, and yet I think they all want to find joy. They all want to find joy, whether it's through a relationship with another person, or through finding space to make art, or through robbing a diner, you know, whether it's through bad decisions or decisions outside of their power. I think that they're deeply hurt, deeply flawed, or struggling with their mental health, but at the end of the day, they want to find joy. And I can relate to that. Wesley Willis was a force. He was schizophrenic, and a schizophrenic musician who had just this Casio keyboard, and was super sweet and an amazing presence. So when I read that quote by him, I thought, I have to use that. I have to use that.
Right. You've talked about your teaching. You teach creative writing. How do you juggle that with your own writing? Do you have a set routine, the way you do it, or do you only?
Yeah, absolutely. I work every day on writing, sometimes twice a day, depending. I mean, I don't really have a life. I don't, like, in terms of what people say. I went and had dinner with the writer Carol Phillips last night, and it was wonderful. It was one of the first times in a while that I'd hung out with someone. Sometimes I go over and watch Formula One racing with my friend Daniel Wallace, and that's been really nice. But you know, like, my social life wasn't affected during the pandemic because I don't have one. All I do is think about writing and work towards writing, and that's where I find my joy. My students think that that's the most depressing thing they've ever heard, but it actually took a lot of work to get here. it took a lot of work to get to the point where all I could care about was
Right.
my writing.
I'm
So,
interested to know that you have switched to novels, and I can't wait to see what comes out. So we'll have you back again.
yeah, I just
When
finished
does
it.
your novel come out?
I have no idea,
Okay.
It's like at this point, I have to go through the messy, I did not have an agent for these two books. I did the work on my own. But I don't want to do that with the novel. So at this point, I have to go through the whole like messy ordeal of finding help.
Right.
So that's happening now, or will like beginning next week or so. So
Let us know when it's ready, and we will.
I would say just pray for me, everybody. Pray for me. It's a cold world out there.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being with us. It's been great.
Thank you so much.
This time on Chapters, but please stay tuned for the next time. And in the meantime, keep your masks on, get your vaccination, and stay well. This is Carter saying goodbye. And thank you again, Randall.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Connect with Chapters through email. Write to lp4@zoominternet.net. Chapters has a Facebook page at Armstrong Chapters. Like, subscribe, share, and comment. All Chapters episodes are available on YouTube. Visit the Armstrong Neighborhood channel on YouTube and look for a playlist of all the Chapters programs.